On this episode of the How to Japanese podcast, I'll be talking about how I found my Japanese roommates in Tokyo and about how studying Japanese is a lot like eating the same bento every day for a long time. There were a few points when I kind of regretted having roommates in Tokyo. The first was shortly after I arrived at the apartment and realized that my boxes from the countryside had preceded me. I'd carefully selected the delivery time and marked it on the label as you can do in Japan, but the folks at Kuroneko Yamato must have been overachievers that day, apparently, because my roommates ended up carrying the boxes into my bedroom for me. I felt bad about that, but not too bad. I did end up donating my widescreen TV and Nintendo Wii to the apartment when I moved home. The real regret came when I walked into my 6-mat room. The boxes filled nearly half of the 100 square meters of space, and it was immediately clear that A, I had brought way too much stuff to Japan when I moved there 3 years earlier, B, I had accumulated even more unnecessary stuff while living there, and C, I should have left more to my jet successor, who had a spacious apartment in the Inaka, and plenty of cabinets and closets and bookshelves to store things. The other moment of regret came when there were 7 or 8 of us all living in a place built for 5. There were 5 bedrooms in the apartment, all of which had doors opening onto the combined kitchen living space. We shared 2 toilets and 1 shower, but because this was Japan, I was never too inconvenienced. My roommates were all courteous and clean for the most part, and I was the only weirdo who used the bathtub. But other than these 2 moments, and perhaps a few others that time has since smoothed over and I've forgotten, finding Japanese roommates in Tokyo was the highlight of my time in Japan. I spoke with realtors about apartments in areas outside of the city center that I was familiar with and knew might have affordable rent, but the sheer cost of signing a lease was intimidating. At the time, in 2008, it cost as much as 400 to 600,000 yen, the equivalent of $4,000 to $6,000 just to get set up. I had that much saved up, probably a little more, but I didn't feel like the locations I was finding were worth it, and so I started looking on the website Roomshare.jp for a room in the range of 40 to 80,000 yen a month that had a decent commute to Shimbashi where I would be working. I don't remember how I came across the site, so if someone introduced it to me, I'd like to thank them, and I hope they're doing well and earn some kind of karmic reward for the favor that they did me. Roomshare.jp is sort of like a Craigslist specifically for those seeking rooms and for those with rooms to rent. You can specify location, cost, and write a little bit about yourself for the room. I put up a funny self-introduction that I felt captured my personality. I won't read the whole thing here, but I listed 5 merits I had as a roommate. 1, I could speak Japanese and didn't need to rely on people around me. 2, I had an HD TV and a Nintendo Wii. Clearly, this was important. 3, I could cook a little. 4, I'd spent around 5 years in Japan and was familiar with the country, so I was unlikely to experience culture shock. And 5, I'd lived with roommates in college. I'll post the whole thing on howtojapanese.com for anyone who is curious about the message and potentially using it as a model. I got contacted by people here and there, and I reached out to others, and altogether I went to see 3 or 4 different rooms. Most of them were not great. One was in a huge high-rise adjacent to Osaki Station, and the man who showed me around had partitioned a large apartment into bite-sized living areas with bedsheets hung from the ceiling. There must have been a dozen people or so living in an apartment meant for 3 or 4. Another was near Shiomi Station, on a tiny island built from reclaimed land in Tokyo Bay. The room itself was nice enough, but it was far from the Keio line, which itself was a long hike to access at Tokyo Station, and the island itself was kind of urban and nondescript. I couldn't see living there being very pleasant. And then finally, on May 17, 2008, I got an email out of the blue that seemed almost too good to be true. There was a single room in an apartment available for 55,000 yen a month, including utilities. It was 10 minutes from Shimbashi, where I'd be working, and only a 7-minute walk from Nishi-Oi Station on the Yokosuka line. It was available for immediate move-in, and they wanted me to not only come see the apartment, but to go to dinner with them and stay one night. This was the email that drastically changed my time in Japan. I ended up visiting on May 30th after arriving from Fukushima by bus to meet my mom who was visiting Japan. There were 4 core roommates, 2 Japanese men and 2 Japanese women, and they were adding me and 1 additional roommate, a Korean exchange student who ended up meeting us at a Chinese restaurant later that night. I don't remember much of what we talked about, but it all felt incredibly natural. The apartment itself was unique. It was the entire second floor of a square building nestled close to the Shinkansen tracks running over the Yokosuka line. The first floor was a chicken butcher that cut up frozen chicken into smaller pieces and sold them wholesale. There was a metal front that they noisily rolled up like a garage door every weekday when they started work early in the morning. A staircase ran up the side of the building to a front door. After staying that first night, I vividly remember getting ready to walk back to the station, and as I was on the rusty staircase, I looked back at Teppei, the guy who ran the place and had coordinated my visit, and asked, what year was the apartment built? Nannen chiku desu ka? In my apartment hunting, I'd read that it was best to find newer buildings that were more earthquake resistant. Nannen daro? I wonder, he said. Kanari furui daro? It's probably pretty old. I mulled it over for the next day or two while I was showing my mom around Japan, but despite my misgivings about the age of the apartment, by June 2nd or so, I let them know I wanted to live there. It just felt like the right place to be. I have so many good memories of living there. I moved in July, and because I didn't have much paid leave at the new company, I ended up spending the New Year's holiday there with a couple of my roommates who also didn't have plans. We made pizza and drank beer and watched Japanese New Year's TV. My second New Year's there, my brothers visited, and two of my roommates joined us when we rung in 2010 at Popeye in Ryogoku, a beer bar there, where they had this massive goblet of beer that got passed around the restaurant to celebrate. As an introvert, I did find it kind of exhausting always having people around and never really having my own space, but the benefits definitely outweighed the disadvantages. I learned how to cook sammayaki by watching my roommates. Teppei and the Korean exchange student made takoyaki every Sunday. The Korean exchange student worked at a convenience store and brought home snacks that had expired and left them on the kitchen table for people to have. Even things like soji, the annual cleaning, were fun. We wrapped all of our things in plastic bags, set off an insect bomb to fumigate the place, and then got breakfast at a family restaurant. A few hours later, once the gas had dissipated, we divided up the chores and set about cleaning the place. I'm still friends with all of them, mostly via Facebook, but I'm really close with Teppei. He invited me to his wedding. He visited New Orleans, my hometown, for his honeymoon, and I went to eat crab with him and his parents regularly at their house in Kugayama. He was always up for entertaining any crazy ideas I had, like my rainy season Yamanote-sen pub crawl, where we tried to have a beer at every station on the Yamanote line that had a bar inside the station gates. Teppei went on to basically supersize his room share experience. He now has 3 kids and lives in a communal housing setup that has separate living areas but a massive shared kitchen and dining area. The residents include young families and older singles. They have shared meals and events, and I spent New Year's 2016 with them. Teppei was the person who set up the apartment in Nishioi and arranged for everything. I sent him money each month, and he took care of the rest. I was pretty broke during my time in Tokyo. I was so naive and green that I didn't know how to negotiate my pay when I took a new job, and ended up basically taking a pay cut from Jet. I broke even over that 2-year period more or less, but I would have been significantly worse off financially had I not ended up where I had, and I have Teppei to thank for that. Not every roommate will be as good as Teppei, and having roommates during a global pandemic isn't ideal, but I do think it's worth considering a room share if you're looking for housing in Japan. So check out Roomshare.jp, see what you can make of it. It's good Japanese practice, even just to browse and try and find a listing. You can really enrich your experience in Japan with a room share and save some money along the way. Just pack light. I've become a better traveler in the last 10 years, so I'm looking forward to being more agile the next time I go over to Japan. その1年間、のり弁を食べて生きていました。リスナーの皆さん、のり弁ってわかりますか？のり弁はのり弁当の略語です。どこの弁当屋でも、のり弁はだいたい一番安くて簡単な弁当なんです。弁当屋によって中身が変わりますが、ご飯に板のりがメインです。ほっかほっか亭では白身魚フライやコロッケなどが入っています。正確にすれば丸1年間ではありませんでした。早稲田で留学していたので9ヶ月間でした。しかも週末通学しなかったからのり弁を食べない日もありましたが、のり弁はその間僕の栄養の大部分を占めていました。僕が毎日食べていたのり弁は簡単というよりミニマリストの弁当と言えるほど何も入ってなかったです。コロッケ半分、おかか、ちくわフライぐらいで350円しかかかりませんでした。たまにプラス30円で唐揚げを1個追加してもらいました。まあまあ美味しかったです。僕には十分でしたが、 500円でもっと美味しい弁当を買えたと思います。留学途中でノルウェー人の友達が韓国料理屋を紹介してくれて、あそこの弁当はカルビやブルゴギなどが入っていて、すごく美味しかったです。たまにご褒美として食べました。でもほとんどの日、その一番安くて簡単な海苔弁を食べました。ある意味ではつまらなかったけど、言語学習に例えるとしたら役に立つ比喩のではないかと思います。まず言語学習は毎日しないといけません。つまり継続は力。毎日何か食べないと生きていけないですね。栄養も十分取れないとダメです。海苔弁は簡単にもかかわらず栄養が十分あります。もちろん海苔弁だけでは生きていませんでした。朝食もあったし、コーヒーやお茶も飲んでいたし、学生寮で晩ご飯も食べていました。留学の間はコーラもやめました。でも、ほぼ毎日のお昼は海苔弁でした。日本語の勉強もそうです。話したり、読んだり、聞いたりしないとダメですが、基本的に同じことを繰り返す必要があります。永遠のように続く漢字の覚え方、同じ単語を何回も何回も調べること。今日こそ漢字を勉強したくない日、今日こそ海苔弁を食べたくない日もありますが、我慢して勉強します。食べます。今考え直してみますと、自分自身についての知識は、食生活が大事な一部なんです。その知識がないと、人生が難しくなると思います。勉強の習慣もそうです。自分はどのように勉強して生きていけるのか、何をどのように読めば、聞けば、話せば、書けば成長できるのか。ただ、その知識を把握したら、残るのは海苔弁のようにその知識を継続的に実践することです。つまらないけど、栄養がたっぷり入っているものがたくさんあります。Thanks for listening. You can find How to Japanese on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Substack. I'll see you next week. それではまた来週。